And then Emily was talking about the time that every time he went sledding with them when they were girls, he always got injured, a head injury, always, with the forehead. And one time we were looking at houses, and everyone knows how short Carl was. He couldn't look in the windows. Emily was 16 years old. She had to pick him up. So that's my share of that. I Googled how to speak about a loved one at a celebration of life. Many were sappy and not what Carl would want to hear. But one I found a little bit humorous was comparing your loved one to Forrest Gump's. Sean, life was on the box of chocolates. I laughed when I read it, thinking Carl would die. He had a way, but in some ways, he was just like that. He had a hard outer shell and a gooey center like chocolate covered caramels. Sometimes a little nutty like his favorite Reese's peanut butter cups. If you guys notice, we got Reese's peanut butter cups on here. Carl always hid them from me. Although he wasn't that sneaky, he always put them in his top drawer. That was his thing. But we figured we'd let you guys share them with him. Sometimes he was a little sour, like those tart chocolate covered cherries. Yes, I literally compared my husband to a box of chocolates. Which makes sense because he was a sweet little morsel. He was my sweetie. I met Carl July 3rd of 1994. He didn't know it at the time, but he had already stolen my heart. He had beautiful long curls, and because he was a roofer, he was muscular. You'll see the proof in some of them slideshows over there of Carl. Our first date was a month later when he brought me to meet his family. Carl was a cheap date. We were stopped at a red light on Cumby in 98. Carl looked at me and said, "You sure got some purty eyeballs." Yep, it was at that moment he totally owned my heart. When our girls were born, he was such an amazing daddy to them. He took so much pride in them. From the moment they took their first breath, his heart swelled with love for them. He remained so overprotective of them, from infants until adulthood. I had to remind him that they were adults and they needed to handle their own problems. After this past year, we would lay in bed and talk. Sometimes we laughed about our bodies not working anymore like they used to. How silly we looked trying to ride a bike or to go sledding. We agreed that we both would look like a turtle on its back. Other than that, he would tell me how proud he was of the kids. He was so proud of the great mama Emily was to her grandson Luke. He was proud of Sarah for graduating with honors as a registered nurse. He was proud of Josh for being a great husband and dad. Carl was in awe how quick Luke was growing and gaining his own personality. Carl was known by many names: Duck, No Neck, Sling Blade, Garden Gnome, Speedy, Hubby, Daddy, Grumpa, father-in-law, son, brother, uncle, and friend. But none of these compare to the title of Amazing Man. I always said that Carl may be a short man, but his heart was bigger than him, and that is why he will always be the love of my life. Carl, I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with you, and then I realized you spent the rest of your life with me. I smile because I know you loved me until the day you went away, and I will keep loving you until the day we're together again. I love you forever, baby. I was supposed to get through that without crying. Carl's friend Sean would like to say a few words, and then if there's anyone after that who would like to get up and talk about Carl, like I said, tell us some funny stories.
I might have some funny stories.
Well, you got him and your dog up on a roof together.
Carl is my buddy. Nicknames. I used to call him Carly. I don't think I called him that in front of anybody, but I tried to poke at him a little bit. Nothing really got to him. It was a tough old guy. So I wrote something down. I'm not really good with speeches, but let me read what I wrote. I'll try to get through it without stumbling, but we definitely had some good times. My dad and Carl worked together at Springer Peterson Roofing. I only started to get to know Carl after I moved to Morgan Drive and became his neighbor. My dad's over there, Victor, another roofer. I soon found out Carl was part of an unofficial neighborhood watch program with my next-door neighbor, Scott. Long before I moved into the neighborhood, Carl and Scott had joined forces. Carl and Scott were best buds, like Cheech and Chong. Anyways, Carl and Scott kept an eye out for everyone in the neighborhood. It didn't take much time for them to investigate what I was up to after I moved in. Carl and Scott both helped with a number of home improvements to my house, and Carl was always willing to help. Carl watched as I settled into the neighborhood and began to pursue my goal to become a deputy sheriff. Whenever I was at work, I knew Carl had my back. He would watch over my home. One day I left home with my front door wide open, and he came down to shut it. Carl was like that. He would go out of his way for friends. He would go out of his way for me, and that definitely showed. He also caught me a few times leaving my patrol car door open in the front yard. I worked nights. I would come home, unload my stuff, go inside, maybe occasionally forget to shut the door of my patrol car with my gun in it. Don't tell anybody at the sheriff's office. But he would let me know he had my back. Looking back, I guess I had a bad habit of that, but luckily I had Carl. Even though Carl had some years on me, he was a tough guy. Carl would get down and dirty on any job. Carl was ready to help me at the drop of a hat. He would show up in his sleeveless shirt, camo Patriots hat, jeans, and boots, ready to go. Countless times he was there for me. I tell anyone, Carl is a good guy to have around. Even my dog liked Carl. Carl had a good soul. My dog, Dino, would wiggle his whole butt at the mere sight of Carl. I knew each time Carl was coming over because Dino would be the first to spot him walking down the road. One thing I liked about Carl was he never treated me like a deputy or someone that was younger than him. He treated me like a friend. I used to joke around with him saying, you know, Carl, this neighborhood ain't that bad. Then, staring at his face, I would say, there's just one guy who can't stand on this street, staring at him. Until Carl pondered a bit, until it dawned on him that I was referring to him. Well, Carl would give me a brotherly slap on the shoulder and drop a few cuss words my way with a big grin on his face. It was times like that Carl had some choice nicknames for me I'd rather not repeat, but we were always joking around with each other. He might also follow up with a tough guy handshake. And if you knew Carl, you knew this tough guy handshake very well. Carl was invited to several of my get-togethers. Holiday get-togethers, family get-togethers, family events, birthdays. He was there when I got married to Chelsea. Carl watched as Chelsea and I planned to have our first kid. He later held my infant daughter in his arms. Can you imagine such a tough guy holding such a tiny and fragile thing? We shared very good times together. Carl and his family became an extension to my own family. I've been lucky to know Carl, Deanna, Sarah, Emily, Josh. Maybe not so much Josh. Deep down, Carl's macho man personality was a cover-up for a soft-hearted soul. Once you got to know Carl, he showed you his true colors. He may have shown his affection for others in a different way, but his love for his wife and daughters was obvious. Carl constantly bragged about his daughters. He told me how proud he was of Sarah and her educational goals. He was confident in her and never doubted her for a second. I watched as Carl held back tears as he gave away Emily at her wedding. Watching Carl dance with his baby girl at her wedding made me think of my own daughter and her future. Carl had touched so many lives. I'd have to say Carl's biggest supporter and best friend was his wife. Even when Carl was the biggest pain in the butt, Deanna knew how to hold her own. Carl knew which boundaries not to cross with Deanna. even if he liked testing the waters. It was no surprise to me when I discovered the family's nickname for Carl after he became a Rumba. Carl had his own way of showing affection for Deanna, but everyone knew how much he loved her. I always told Carl Deanna would do anything for him, and he definitely knew that. Carl knew he was my buddy, no matter how much I picked on him. And trust me, I picked on him pretty good sometimes. I remember one time I told Carl I needed his help with a tenant who owed me rent. I told Carl, bring your baseball bat, get ready to rough a guy up. Carl showed up to my house ready to knock on the door. Carl showed up to my house ready to go with a baseball bat in his hand. Little did Carl know it was all a joke. I took Carl to my brother's house and had him knock on the door. Never been in my brother's house before. I told him to tell the tenant, pay up. When Carl saw my brother answer the door, I think he was a little disappointed. He was ready to rough a guy up. My brother and I ended up taking Carl to the Isles of Capri and grabbed a few beers. At the end of the night, we had a good story, but I'll tell you, Carl was ready to fight for his friends if he needed to. I'm proud to call Carl my friend. Just like Carl, I'd fight anyone who thinks otherwise. Carl's my buddy.
You really thought you were gonna rough someone up that night.
Sorry.
The baseball bat, you were ready to go.
I'm Mark. I'm married to Tony, who's Carl's older sister. She wasn't able to come today, so she wanted me to read this for her. It said, my earliest memory of Carl illustrates one of the most enduring and difficult qualities. Bevan Al might remember this differently, but this is how she remembers it. Carl was young, maybe 3 or 4. And like children, he wanted to know what those holes in his nose were capable of doing. Somehow, somewhere, he got a hold of a beam and put it up one of those nostrils. Trying as she might, Mom was not able to remove it, and Dad had to take over. Holding the empty nostril closed, Carl, blow. Carl just looked at him. Son, you have to blow it to have it come out. Carl just looked at him. Come on, you gotta blow like this. So Dad would demonstrate on how to blow out your nose. Nothing worked. She's not really sure how they ever decided how that would work with all the coaxing. She doesn't know how they finally got that bean out. But what she remembers is Carl's stubbornness, his tenacity, his wholeheartedness. He grew to be a teenager who was stubborn, tenacious, and wholehearted. He grew up to be a man, stubborn, tenacious, and wholehearted. He grew to be whatever he did, he was all in. He was committed to it, to his family, to his friends, to his work. I will miss Carl. I will miss his phone calls. Hey, what are you doing? That was it. That was about the conversation. And he'd just wait. And you'd have to coax it out of him. Okay, Carl, like you called him. She'll miss his hugs. She says, I'll miss his hugs that made you feel like you were hugged when it was over. His laughter, his eyes twinkling while he laughed out loud, wholeheartedly. Understanding life and death is hard. We can put our hope in God, who not only understands it, but orchestrates it. For everything there is a season and a time, for every matter under heaven. All right, mine. I met Carl probably I think he was about 15, 16 years old. And I think the first thing I ever said to him was, what? Because he had a way of speaking that was very, I couldn't quite stand him all the time. So I learned how to pick out certain words that I kind of understood after a while what Carl was saying. But Carl, when she was talking about his tenacity, one of the first episodes was Blizzard in 1977. We went over to the house to see how they had made out during the blizzard. Well, we saw tire tracks coming off the back of the house where there's a hill going down to a bog, out to a lake, the pond. Well, asked them what the tracks were from. Well, they had decided to take the Ford Pinto out onto the pond during the blizzard to have fun. But if anybody knows the Pintos, they weren't that reliable, and it got stuck out on the pond. So they had to push it. It's probably a good half mile from the pond through 2 feet of snow up the back into the backyard so they didn't get caught by their father. Another time during a blizzard, they decided to come up and visit me. I lived down in the Cape, and during the blizzard, again, snow blizzard over the bridge, they get stopped by the police. They ran a red light. Carl's reaction was, I don't believe it's red, it was pink. The cop let him go, and that was Carl.
Land a little more than both of them stories. I ain't got a lot to say. I also, my man, a few words as my brother. But the Pinto, we ran into a snowdrift. We dug with 2 shovels all the way from where we got stuck, all the way up to the back of the house. But I love my brother. He was my best friend. I noticed this 1960. My dad kept me back 12th grade so we could go through school together. I thought, hey, this is pretty cool. We can copy each other's homework. Well, we never did. She did her homework for us. But all I was saying, when this happened, I said, God, where were you when I needed you? And then he said, where were you when you needed me?
I'm probably gonna say a lot of things that everybody else said about what they'll remember most about Carl. I remember my first hug from him and how he broke back when he did it. Just came up and wham! Right there in the middle. Man alive, I didn't know I was thankful for my spine that day. I always remember those handshakes. How I go to shake his hand, he'd take mine fully, and he just squeezed a little bit with a twinkle in his eye, like he could take that hand anytime, but he wouldn't. But my biggest memory I remember of Uncle Carl was actually on my grandpa's birthday, his dad's birthday. He was sick and tired of the crowd. He went outside to go smoke. And I knew he was going outside to smoke, but part of me was thinking, gotta be awfully lonely out there. So I snuck away from the party and went outside with Uncle Carl. He's like, what are you doing out here, kid? And I'm just like, well, you know, didn't want you to be out here by yourself. And, you know, younger me was always wanting to tell everybody about Jesus, not as shy as I am today. And so I went to go talk to him about it, and he just gave me this look like, son, I know. And so we would just hang out. And when he was done, we'd go back to the party, and, you know, it just seemed like he would stay a lot longer at those parties if somebody went outside with him. Not like more recent. Get to the party, grab a drink, let's go. That's my uncle. Big heart, strong hands.
I'll be short, I promise. My mom had 4 kids in 4.5 years. I was the baby, and My sister, she was the oldest, so I grew up with my 2 brothers between. So we were always together. And the teachers knew I was doing their homework. I even had a teacher sign my yearbook saying to the girl who did her brother's homework. But we grew up in the country, so we kind of made our own fun. And I was always taller. Deanna was talking about his shortness, but he was a giant as a man and as a brother. But he always wanted to be taller than me. And he finally gave up because he never made it. So he would always sign a card or anything to my little but taller sister. But he was a great man. And every time before he would hug me, I'm like, please don't hurt me. But he did it anyway. But I remember him and Albert both, they played football. And every time he would get tackled or whatever, even the refs would come yelling, the coaches from the other team, get off him, get off him, get off him. Because he was so little, but he was so mighty. And Sean, on behalf of my mom, I want to thank you for being Carl's friend. She knew that he was good because you were his friend. And she really appreciated your friendship with her. You'll never know. You'll never know.
I got one. The best memory I got with Carl, I didn't even want to go. We were up in Massachusetts, and my cousin-in-law now, he's got all these big guns. He's got a big closet full of guns. We went out and shot some big guns, and 2-degree weather. So me, thick being a Florida boy, I put on 3 pairs of socks. And apparently you're not supposed to do that because your feet freeze, like feet sweat and it freezes to the sock. So I'm checking my boots all day there, seeing if they like froze off, seeing if I'm standing on ice. I wasn't standing on ice, and he told me to go down to the rifle range area right next to it. So I went down there and I didn't see the ice. I slipped on the ice all the way down, and he's just up there at the top of the little hill thing laughing. You're an idiot. I told him I want 3 pairs of socks. My boots not rotting off right now. I'm standing on ice. That's where you messed up. And so yeah, that was the day I froze my foot off. But that was a good memory.
What about the rabbit stew that has helped me?
We ate rabbit stew and clear out all the bees from the bird shot. And so we were eating stew, picking out bees and putting them on the table, you know. On every plate.
Ryan, Carl's neighbor, and I first moved on to Morgan Drive. You know, always, a beer drinker knows a beer drinker, you know. Him and the other neighbor, Scott, they were sitting. I was like, how do I go over there? Well, I seen the one guy, he always mows the yard of Scott. So I'm like, all right, that's an in. Anyhow, that's how I met him. Every day after that, every day. Hey, what do you do? Every day. He said, want a beer? Yes, I do. He's done a lot of things. Remember, this guy Sean over here had a drone. He's like, come over and look at this thing, you know, it's cool. Whatever, you know. As soon as he flies it up, boom, right in the tree. We have this big adventure now. We got a ladder out, all 3 of us, and we're trying to get this drone out. And I'm holding up this ladder. This other neighbor's got it. And I'm the only one holding him. And he's on the top. This guy Scott, our friend. And Carl's trying to help me, and he's just doing this. Not even touching the ladder. I look down at him. What are you doing, bud? And he's like, I want to, you know, be part of it. I was like, just chill, you know. And that's one of my favorite moments there, you know. And no matter what you were doing, you wanted to help him, you know. If you're outside fixing something, he's coming over, you know. Glad he was my neighbor, my friend. And he made Morgan Drive, so yeah. This is our glue.
Ryan, I remember that. I got the video over here. Give it to me before you leave.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't even
He
finish the
says his
story.
hands were on the ladder.
He says his hands are on the ladder.
All right, what Ryan's neglecting to tell this story to Scott that they had on the ladder, their way of safety for Scott, they tied Scott to the ladder. And they weren't leaning the ladder against the tree, they were holding it upright.
For future reference to anyone, ladders are not meant to be held.
Chelsea and I sat in the driveway and just watched them.
Yeah, everybody was like waiting for something bad to
Someone's gonna
happen.
get hurt, someone's gonna get hurt.
So many stories. It just comes to me now. Don't let kids go to
I gotta say something. I'm Victor Sean's dad. I know, and his brother from Springer Peterson. And I remember Sean come out one day and said, Dad, you know, I met these guys that used to work in Springer. He said, he knows you. I said, well, what do you think? He's like, I don't know, but next time I go out there, I want you to come with me. All right. So then he told me, I know his name. What you got the car on? I said, yeah, I know Carl now. We used to be out there working. He's like, yeah. And so I went out there, and the first thing he did, same thing like we were just talking about. I mean, that's handshake. Yeah, you still drinking? I said, yeah, you want me to go get a beer out of the I got a cooler out there. I mean, why three? Oh my God. Drink one, right? That's how I got you three. So then, I said, well, what do you think about Sean? He's like, what do you mean? You're drinking and he's a police officer. You didn't think he's gonna give you a maybe pass, walk the line or something? He looked at Sean. I said, let's take Carl to the store. We went to the store in Dixie right there. I said, why don't you give him a test? He go like this to me. So every time Sean looked at me, I said, what do you think, Dad? We make him walk the line. I said, why don't you do that now? we was laughing the whole story with Dixie when we was walking, and Sean always wanted to take him. And I said, let's take him. But he was a good friend. I was a good friend. I know him and Carl for a long time. And he always asked me about Jeff. And I told Jeff about coming here today, but for some reason he didn't make it.
Yeah, they were supposed to.
Yeah, and he always told me another thing, that he always told me every time he see me, he said, I want to go back to Springer. I said, do you want me to sit with somebody for you? He's like, just let me get better. Well, because he was going through things, I guess. But that was his thing. He always wanted to go back to Springer. Every time he see me, he'd tell me that.
He missed.
Yeah.
I don't know if a lot of people know that about a little over 5 years ago, Carl had a cardiac arrest. And it kind of messed with his memory. But we could go down the road and he was like, I roofed that, I did that roof, I worked with such and such on that roof. He knew every roof, knew every little convenience store he stopped to get his beer at lunchtime. But he couldn't remember a phone call that he made. But he knew every roof and who he did it with.
Yep. And he tell you the names too.
Yep.
Yep.
I can attest to that. Anytime I would take them anywhere, I worked that roof.
Yep.
That flat roof right there, I worked that.
Yep.
He did the height, you did.
Yeah.